My parents bought my sister a brand new car with my college savings, while I was walking miles to work every day. Years later, they showed up begging for help and had no idea what I had become. I, 32 was 17 when I found out my college fund was gone. Not misplaced, not temporarily borrowed, gone. Spent. Evaporated into the shape of a cherry red convertible sitting in our driveway with an oversized bow on the hood. My sister turned 16 that Tuesday. I remember because I'd worked a double shift at the grocery store the day before, my feet aching as I walked the 4 miles home in the dark. I was saving everything I could. State University wasn't cheap, even with the partial scholarship I'd earned. The college fund my grandparents had set up before they died was supposed to cover the rest. $50,000, accumulated over years of their modest contributions, meant specifically for my education. I came downstairs that morning to find my sister screaming with joy in the driveway, my parents beaming like they'd just won the lottery. Dad had his arm around Mom's shoulder, both of them glowing with pride at their generosity. The car was beautiful, I'll admit that. Brand new, fully loaded, the kind of gift that makes neighbors stop and stare. I asked Mom about it later, after the excitement died down. I kept my voice calm, reasonable. I mentioned that I needed to make the first tuition payment in 3 months and wanted to know the account details to set up the transfer. She looked at me with this confused expression, like I was speaking another language. She said the account had been closed. She said it so casually, like she was telling me we were out of milk. When I asked what she meant, she explained that my sister needed a car, that it wasn't fair for her to take the bus when I'd had use of Mom's old sedan during high school. She said they discussed it and decided this was the right choice for the family. I stood there in our kitchen, the same kitchen where I'd done homework at that table for years, where my grandparents had sat during Sunday dinners, where they told me how proud they were that I wanted to go to college. Nobody in our family had gone before. I was supposed to be the first. I asked about my tuition. Dad answered this time, said I'd figure it out. He said I was smart, that I'd get more scholarships or loans. He said my sister needed this more because she wasn't academically inclined like me, that this was an investment in her independence. He actually used that word. Investment. The thing about betrayal is that it doesn't hit all at once. It seeps in slowly, filling up all the empty spaces where trust used to be. I went upstairs to my room and sat on my bed for a long time, staring at the acceptance letter pinned to my bulletin board. Full ride denied, partial scholarship accepted, remaining balance due in 3 months. $17,000 for the first year. Money I no longer had. I didn't yell. I didn't throw things. I made a decision instead. I spent the next week researching every option available. Loans would crush me. I calculated the interest and saw decades of debt stretching ahead. More scholarships were possible, but unlikely in the short time frame. I needed a different path entirely. I found it in the Army. The recruiter's office was 6 miles away, and I walked there on a Saturday morning. The sergeant was straightforward with me. 4 years active duty, college benefits after, skills and discipline included. I'd be leaving 2 months after graduation, heading to basic training while my former classmates moved into dorm rooms. I told my parents at dinner that night. Mom cried, said I was being dramatic. Dad said I was making a mistake out of spite, that I'd regret throwing away my education. My sister didn't look up from her phone. I told them the decision was made and asked them not to contact me unless it was an emergency. I packed the things that mattered into 3 boxes and moved them to my friend's garage for storage. Those last months at home were quiet. I worked, graduated, and left on a Tuesday morning in July. Mom tried to hug me at the door. I stepped back. Dad wanted to shake my hand. I picked up my bag and walked to the recruiter's car idling in the driveway. I didn't look back at the house or at my sister's red convertible gleaming in the morning sun. Basic training broke me down and built me back up. I learned what I was capable of when comfort wasn't an option. I learned that fairness was a myth and that the only person I could truly rely on was myself. I learned to push past pain, past doubt, past the voice in my head that sometimes sounded like my mother asking why I was being so stubborn. I served 4 years. I saw 2 deployments, made friends who became brothers, lost one of them to an IED outside Kandahar. I grew up in ways I never would have at State University, living in a dorm, worrying about fraternity parties and football games. When my contract ended, I used my benefits exactly as planned. I enrolled in college at 22, older than my classmates, harder around the edges. I studied finance and computer science, double major, no breaks. I worked part-time as a security consultant, leveraging skills the Army had taught me. I graduated in 3 years with a 3.9 GPA and job offers from 4 different firms. I took the one in Seattle. Far from home. High salary. Room to grow. That was 7 years ago. I built something in those 7 years. Started as an analyst, moved to consulting, then management. I took risks, switched companies twice for better opportunities, and invested aggressively. I launched a cybersecurity startup with 2 former colleagues when I was 28. We filled a niche in the market that the big firms had overlooked, focusing on mid-sized businesses that couldn't afford enterprise solutions but desperately needed protection. We sold the company last year for $38 million. My share after splits and taxes was $11 million. I didn't tell anyone. Not old friends. Not Army buddies who I still met up with annually. Definitely not my family. I'd had the same cell number for years, and they'd never called it. Not for birthdays, not for holidays. The silence went both ways, and I'd made peace with that. I bought a modest house outside Seattle, nothing flashy. I drove a 4-year-old truck. I dated occasionally, nothing serious. I volunteered at a veterans center on weekends, helping younger guys navigate their transitions to civilian life. I lived well below my means and invested the rest, building something that would last, something that was entirely mine. The call came on a Thursday in October. Unknown number, local area code from my hometown. I almost didn't answer. I'd learned that unknown numbers rarely brought good news. But something made me pick up. Mom's voice, older and smaller than I remembered. She asked if it was really me, like the number might have changed hands in 8 years. I confirmed and waited. She started crying, said she didn't know who else to call. She said Dad was sick, that they'd lost the house, that they needed help. She said my sister couldn't contribute because she had her own problems. She said they'd always loved me. That family was supposed to help family. I let her finish. I asked what was wrong with Dad. Cancer, she said. Stage 3, aggressive treatment. Insurance wasn't covering everything. They'd refinanced the house twice over the years, she explained, and now they were upside down on the mortgage. The bank was foreclosing. They were going to be on the street in 60 days. I asked about my sister. Mom's voice got defensive. She said my sister was struggling, that she'd made some bad choices with credit cards and a failed business venture. She said my sister's husband had left her, that she was barely keeping her own apartment. She couldn't help them even if she wanted to. I asked what happened to the car. Silence. Then Mom admitted my sister had totaled it 3 years after getting it, driving drunk. No insurance payout because of how it happened. They'd bought her another car after that, used but reliable. That one got repossessed when my sister stopped making payments. I asked how much they needed. Mom hesitated, then said anything would help, but realistically they needed about $60,000 to clear the mortgage and cover Dad's medical bills. I told her I'd think about it and ended the call. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on my back porch and watched the city lights in the distance, thinking about 17-year-old me walking 4 miles home in the dark. Thinking about my grandparents, gone now for over a decade, who'd never know their carefully saved money had bought a car instead of an education. Thinking about the principle of the thing, about fairness and justice, and whether any of it actually mattered in the end. By morning, I made my decision. I called Mom back. I told her I'd help, but there were conditions. I wanted to meet in person, all 3 of them. I wanted a full accounting of their financial situation. And I wanted to do this my way, no arguments. Mom agreed immediately, desperate gratitude flooding her voice. We set a date for the following Saturday. I booked a flight home for the first time in 8 years. Update 1. The house looked smaller. That's the first thing I noticed pulling up in my rental car. The siding needed paint, the lawn was patchy, and the driveway had cracked spiderwebbing across it. My sister's current car, a beat-up sedan with a dented bumper, sat where the red convertible used to be. Dad answered the door. He'd aged 20 years and 8. Thin, gray, moving carefully like his bones hurt. He stared at me for a long moment, and I saw him taking in the changes. I'd filled out in the Army, added muscle and scars. I dressed differently now, carried myself differently. I wasn't the skinny teenager who'd left anymore. He invited me in. Mom was in the kitchen, looking nervous. My sister sat on the couch, scrolling her phone. She glanced up, didn't recognize me immediately, then did a double take. I told them all to sit. I remained standing. I'd learned in the Army that positioning mattered, that subtle dominance shaped conversations before words ever did. I started with the accounting. I asked for bank statements, medical bills, mortgage documents. Dad produced them slowly from a folder on the coffee table. I spent 20 minutes reviewing everything while they sat in silence. The numbers were worse than Mom had indicated. They weren't just underwater on the house, they were drowning. Credit card debt, medical debt, a second mortgage, a personal loan from their bank. They owed over $90,000 total. I asked how this happened. Dad explained haltingly. The first refinance was for my sister's second car after the convertible was totaled. The second was to pay off my sister's credit cards when she couldn't keep up with minimum payments. The personal loan covered medical bills from Mom's surgery 3 years ago. They'd been making ends meet until Dad's diagnosis 6 months ago, and then everything collapsed. I turned to my sister. I asked what she did for work. She said she was between jobs, doing some gig economy stuff. I asked about the business venture Mom mentioned. She got defensive, said it wasn't her fault the market wasn't ready for her boutique consulting service. I asked what she was consulting on. She mumbled something about social media marketing. I let the silence stretch. I'd learned that too, the power of saying nothing and watching people squirm. Then I told them my plan. I would pay off everything. The mortgage, the medical bills, all of it. I would put the house in my name and let them live there rent-free for as long as they needed. I would set up a trust to cover Dad's ongoing medical expenses. I would ensure they were stable and secure. Mom started crying again, relief and gratitude. Dad looked stunned. My sister actually looked up from her phone. Then I gave them the conditions. First, my sister would receive nothing directly from me ever. She'd made her choices, and she'd live with them. If my parents wanted to help her from their own resources, that was their decision, but not a penny of my money would go to her. Second, they would acknowledge, out loud, right now, what they'd done to me. They would admit that taking my college fund was wrong. They would apologize sincerely. Third, they would write a letter to my grandparents' graves explaining what happened to the money they'd saved. We would go to the cemetery together, and they would read it there. The room went very quiet. My sister broke first. She said I was being cruel, that holding the past over them was petty. She said they needed help now, not judgment. I looked at her directly for the first time. I told her she'd received over $70,000 of investment in her life from our parents. A new car, a second car, credit card bailouts, support through her failed business. I'd received nothing except the lesson that I was on my own. I told her I'd taken that lesson to heart and built a life anyway. I told her I didn't want her opinion on my conditions. Dad spoke next. He said they'd made mistakes. He said they'd thought I'd be fine, that I was capable and smart, that my sister needed more help. He said they'd never meant to hurt me. I asked if that was an apology. He said yes. I told him it wasn't good enough. I needed them to say specifically what they'd done and acknowledge why it was wrong. I needed them to understand that intent didn't erase harm. Mom finally spoke. She said they'd taken my college fund without asking me. She said they'd spent money that wasn't theirs to spend, money my grandparents had saved specifically for my education. She said they'd prioritized one child over another in a way that damaged our relationship permanently. She said they were sorry, truly sorry, and that they'd carry that guilt for the rest of their lives. I asked Dad if he agreed. He nodded, tears in his eyes. I told them I'd start the process Monday. I gave them my lawyer's contact information and told them to expect documents to sign. Then I stood up to leave. Mom asked if I'd stay for dinner. I told her no. She asked when I'd visit again. I told her I didn't know. She asked if we could rebuild our relationship now, if this could be a new start. I stood in the doorway of my childhood home and looked at her. I told her that I'd ensure they were taken care of financially because they were family and because letting them suffer served no purpose. But I couldn't forget what they'd taught me about where I ranked in their priorities. I told her that some betrayals were too fundamental to completely overcome, that I'd help them, but I'd never trust them again. My sister called me an ****. I told her she was welcome to take care of their bills herself if she didn't like my approach. I walked out to my rental car and drove away. In the rearview mirror, I could see Dad standing in the doorway, watching me leave for the second time in 8 years. Update 2. The legal process took 6 weeks. My lawyer handled everything, working with their bank and medical providers to negotiate settlements and arrange the title transfer. The house appraised at $200,000, with $140,000 owed against it. I paid the bank directly, plus all outstanding medical and credit card debt. Total cost was $96,000, barely 1% of my net worth. I set up a trust fund for Dad's medical care with $200,000, enough to cover treatment for years even if his condition worsened. Mom would receive a monthly stipend of $3,000 for living expenses, indexed to inflation. The house would remain mine, but they could live there until they chose to leave or passed away. My sister got exactly what I'd promised, nothing. Mom called me after the paperwork cleared. She thanked me repeatedly, said I'd saved their lives. I told her I was glad I could help. She asked again about visiting, about trying to rebuild. I told her maybe someday, but not now. Dad sent an email. It was short, awkward, the kind of thing someone writes when they're not used to expressing emotion in text. He said he was proud of what I'd built, that he wished he'd told me that more when I was younger. He said he understood if I never forgave him. I didn't reply. My sister sent a message through Facebook, the first direct communication from her in 8 years. She said I was punishing her for our parents' choices, that it wasn't fair to exclude her when they were the ones who'd spent my college fund. She said siblings were supposed to support each other. I blocked her. The truth is that none of this brought me the satisfaction I'd expected. I thought I'd feel vindicated, powerful, maybe even happy. Instead, I felt tired. Solving their crisis with money was easy. The hard part was accepting that no amount of money could fix what was actually broken between us. I went to visit my grandparents' graves on a Sunday morning before flying back to Seattle. I brought flowers and stood there for a while, telling them what had happened. Telling them about the army and the company and the money I'd made. Telling them that their investment had paid off eventually, just not in the way any of us had planned. I told them my parents never came to read their letter. I'd given them 3 weeks after agreeing to my conditions, and they'd never scheduled it. When I'd asked Mom about it, she'd said it felt performative, that they'd apologized already and didn't see the point. I didn't push it. Some people apologize because they're sorry. Some people apologize because they want something. Understanding the difference was its own kind of education. I left the flowers and drove away. Back in Seattle, I focused on what I could control. I joined the board of a nonprofit that helped veterans access education benefits. I donated anonymously to a scholarship fund at my old high school, specifically for students whose families couldn't support their college dreams. I went back to work, back to my routine, back to the life I'd built entirely on my own. My parents send Christmas cards now. I send polite replies. We talk every few months, surface-level conversations about weather and health. Dad's treatment is going well. Mom volunteers at their church. My sister moved to another state, and nobody mentions her anymore. I don't regret helping them. I don't regret the conditions either. What I learned at 17 was that I couldn't depend on anyone else to prioritize my future. What I learned at 32 was that having the power to help doesn't obligate me to forget. Sometimes I think about alternate versions of my life. The one where I'd gone to college at 18, joined a fraternity, graduated without debt or military service. I wonder what kind of person I would have become in that softer world. Whether I'd have the same drive, the same resilience, the same understanding of my own strength. I don't know the answer. What I do know is that I built something real from nothing but determination and spite. I learned that betrayal can be a teacher if you let it, that being underestimated is sometimes an advantage, and that the best revenge isn't cruelty. It's becoming someone they can no longer hurt. My parents bought my sister a car with my future. They gambled that I'd figure it out on my own, and they were right. I did figure it out. I just figured it out without them.